National VJ Day. On September 2nd, National Victory over Japan Day recognizes Allied force victory over Japan during World War II. The signing of surrender took place on September 2nd, 1945 on the U.S.S. Missouri, officially ending World War II. Between 50 and 80 million lives were lost during World War II. These numbers include both military and civilian lives. Fought on every continent except Antarctica, the war consumed entire cities. More than 50 countries took up arms. Even those who maintained isolationist stances held sympathies for one side or the other. We produce 5 videos per week, so please click on the like button and subscribe to see future videos. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Militaries fought on the land and sea and in the air. Civilians often had front row seats to the devastation. When they didn't, technology brought reports to them more quickly. Radio broadcasts and war correspondents informed the public with first-hand details. For 6 long years, the world endured rations, victory gardens, evacuations, drills, and an entirely different way of life, an uncertain future. 6 years of sacrifice and horrors preceded this moment. All around the world, celebrations erupted. However, there would be years of reconciliations, discoveries, and coming to terms with the damage done to relations and humanity. On August 15, 1945, Imperial Japan finally announced their surrender to the United States, bringing an end to the Second World War, known today as VJ Day, aka Victory over Japan Day. Whilst for many it calls for celebration, VJ Day was far from contentious, and although it may have ended the Second World War, the ensuing settlements helped incite others. The name comes from VE Day. The war in Europe had ended on May 8, 1945, and it was known as Victory in Europe Day by the Allies, a recognition of the fact that elsewhere in the world war still raged. The name VJ Day followed on from this, standing for Victory in Japan or Victory in the Pacific. No one can agree precisely on what caused Japan to surrender. Japan agreed to end hostilities and surrender, provided the emperor could remain in place as head of state on August 10, 1945, but it took another 5 days for this to be formalized. Some argue the surrender was a result of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the threat of complete annihilation by the Americans, whilst others cite the declaration of war by the Soviet Union. In late July 1945, Russia, the United Kingdom, and United States of America participated in the Potsdam Conference, where they decided how to carve up Europe and restore peace as far as possible following Germany's surrender. As part of the conference, they issued the Potsdam Declaration, which called for the surrender of all Japanese forces or face prompt and utter destruction, a veiled warning for the Americans' plan to drop atomic bombs on Japan should they refuse to surrender. Japan refused the Potsdam Declaration. The Japanese government discussed and debated the terms of surrender laid out in the Potsdam Declaration, but believed they were too ambiguous and ultimately dishonorable. Shortly thereafter, Japan surrendered unconditionally. The surrender announcement was the first time the emperor's voice had been publicly broadcast via radio. The lack of the word surrender explicitly was also deemed to be confusing, so straight after the emperor's announcement had been broadcast, a public service announcement stated that Japan was unconditionally surrendering to the Allies. Japanese soldiers were furious at the surrender announcement. Japanese military culture was deeply entrenched by the start of the Second World War and centered around the idea that the strength of the military was equal to the strength of the nation and that death was more honorable than surrender. There were reports of Japanese soldiers committing suicide on hearing the declaration of surrender, whilst others simply burst into tears. Many felt betrayed by the Japanese government and emperor. Others, especially civilians, simply went about their business and tried to carry on with their lives as best they could. Japan's surrender remains a sensitive topic. Japan's declaration of surrender signaled the end of Japanese colonial rule in the Korean Peninsula, the end of its attempts to dominate and occupy the Asian mainland and China, and the waning of its influence in Southeast Asia. Following the official signing of the Instrument of Surrender, the Allies quickly began investigating Japanese war crimes. In April 1946, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, more commonly known as the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, began. 28 Japanese military and political leaders were charged with 55 separate counts of war crimes in total. The tribunal lasted 2.5 years. VJ Day was celebrated in Europe as well as America. Impromptu parties in Europe also sprang up. On Regent Street in London, office workers threw handfuls of torn up paper out of the windows in celebration as a form of makeshift confetti.